Hello and welcome. My name is Brian Goss, and I'm a Senior Fellow at the Bitcoin Education Project. I've been involved with Bitcoin since July 2010, and I've had the good fortune to have heard, seen, or been a part of a significant fraction of Bitcoin history. Our history is important, and I believe we need to understand it so we can start to understand where we are headed. To put things in perspective, when I generated my first 50 Bitcoins, I used my laptop, and the Bitcoins I got were worthless. Today, it's about 1,000,000 times more difficult to create 50 Bitcoins, but those Bitcoins would be worth about $5,000. That's a remarkable change, and it happened in a relatively short period of time, less than 3 years. I could venture a guess as to what might happen in the next 3 years, but if we want to reach a little further into the future than that, we're going to have to look a little further into the past. So that's what I did, and I'm here to share that with you today. You might be as surprised as I was to learn that there even is a history of digital currencies before Bitcoin. In fact, there is a solid 2 decades of digital currency history that preceded Bitcoin. In addition to understanding our future with Bitcoin, I hope to show you that Bitcoin is not a revolutionary idea. No, in fact, Bitcoin is a very natural and elegant extension of a few decades of work that preceded it. Also, my email address is goss@btcedproject.org. And I'd love to hear from you. Give me a day or two to respond, though. My hours can be a little rough. So let's get started. What makes the ideal digital cash? Well, more or less the same thing that makes the ideal analog cash. Take your favorite conventional currency note. I'll use the as of yet unreleased 100 USD note. Notice that your name isn't on the bill. This may seem silly to point out, but this is unlike almost every other form of payment you use, like checks and credit card purchases. Cash transactions can be relatively private. Similarly, the ideal digital cash should be private and non-identifying. Non-forgeable. Difficult to steal, but cheap to protect. Gold is hard to steal, but in many places, there's a man with a gun willing to kill you if you try to steal it. Hiring such people doesn't come cheap. Non-double spendable. Easily and rapidly validated. Widely accepted. Divisible. This is kind of unique to digital currencies. For example, cutting $1 in half doesn't make it worth half a dollar. But in the digital world, it would be convenient to be able to split your money so you don't have to give an overpayment and trust the payee to pay you back in change. Combinable. Who likes taking 10,000 pennies to the bank? Thought so. In a digital world, this just doesn't make sense. Transferable. To anyone. Not just to merchants. Durable and portable. Gold is durable, but it's not very portable. Fungible. This means with mutually substitutable units, one unit being as good as another, like barrels of oil. You don't care which barrel of oil, so long as it's a barrel of oil. Easy to use. This goes without saying, but it's actually difficult to achieve. Think about encrypting your email. Theoretically, this is easy to do, but who does it? Stable value. When the exchange rate is rapidly going up and down, it's tough to make decisions with significant uncertainty in the market. If prices are only going up, no one spends. When the prices are only going down, people dump the currency. Irreversible. Once it's spent, it's spent. Your only recourse involves asking for it back or taking legal action against the payee. How many digital currencies existed before Bitcoin? How many before the turn of the millennium? Any guesses? 1? 5? Maybe 10 at the tops, right? Well, there have been a few. Yep, definitely a few. Including Sandia National Labs. Wait a minute, aren't those guys better known for this kind of stuff? This is a huge body of work by large groups of rather diverse people. Clearly, a lot of money has been spent on trying to create a digital currency, but then again, the reward for doing so is rather large. This begs the question, who paid for all of this? Well, for the most part, the US government, international standards bodies, and private companies. For example, the researchers behind NetBill, they received grants from the National Science Foundation. Netcash researchers got DARPA funding. DARPA also funded several projects related to payment processing. The World Wide Web Consortium and Internet Engineering Task Force folks, they had some really nice ideas to implement a micropayment transfer protocol. This turned out to be a bit larger of a bite than they could chew, and it never really panned out. The big credit card companies also had ideas. Let's take a quick look at categorization schemes for digital currencies. There are two main types of digital currencies, and these vary based on what precisely is transmitted during a transaction. Notational digital currencies basically transmit permission to adjust account balances. Token-based digital currencies transmit data called, well, a token, and it is the token itself that has value, much like cash. Other useful features for separating digital currencies involve the type of accounting. Who issues and who accepts the currency for redemption? How is the transaction validated? Is there anything backing the currency, such as fiat, bullion, the promise of service? Let's talk about notational digital currencies. These currency systems are similar to bank accounts, and their transactions are similar to bank transfers. Change is not required as precise amounts are transmitted. The account types can vary depending on the interaction of the payer with the payee. Direct accounts require the payer and payee to directly interact. A direct pull currency is similar to a checking account. When I write you a check, I'm basically giving you a permission slip to decrease my account balance and to increase yours. Indirect currencies do not require direct user interaction. These can be push or pull-based. Direct push currencies would be a token-based currency where the payer directly pays the payee without an intermediary. Token-based digital currencies are not tied to account ledgers and are typically paid for in advance to give the token's value. In these systems, the payee can redeem the token independent of the payer's account status. Again, it is the token that has value. Tokens usually have central points of redemption and a fixed exchange rate. In this respect, tokens are like casino chips. Let's take a look at two very different digital currencies. eGold was a turn-of-the-century company that offered the equivalent of a bullion-backed bank account. eGold took deposits in fiat, but processed withdrawals and transfers in bullion. eGold digital transactions amounted to push authorizations for adjusting paired account ledgers. That is, I could increase your account balance without your permission, and you couldn't stop me. Since the payer and payee did not have to interact, this is an indirect push notational digital currency. Advantages to this system included a bullion-backed ledger, a physical asset that was difficult to steal, irreversible transactions, as in, eGold promised not to reverse the transactions. Payment validation was fast. The disadvantage is, it wasn't truly private. Both the payer and payee could know the account details, and this was also known to eGold. The centralized system proved relatively easy to shut down. The web-based account system? Well, this made individual account security rather challenging, especially in its early days. So what happened to eGold? eGold ran for about 12 years without paying much attention to the anti-money laundering and know your customer laws in the United States. Newly opened accounts were granted full privileges at creation, and there were no restrictions on sock puppet accounts. In fact, their customer identification program began in 2008. The directors were not found guilty of money laundering or operating an unlicensed money transmitter business. They were, however, found guilty of conspiracy to commit those crimes. In the end, most of the charges were dropped, but the directors were sentenced to community service. Ultimately, it was not a technical failure that brought eGold down. It was their failure to integrate with the existing financial system. eGold shuttered its doors in 2008, but it wasn't until December 2010 that the government even approved their plan to return money to their customers. It was another 2.5 years before users could even start filling out the forms to get their money back. When Uncle Sam shuts you down, it can be a long and painful process. According to their blog, as of April 2013, eGold held approximately $90 million worth of bullion. A quick detour about a less conventional notational digital currency. Rivest and Shamir had a great idea in 1995 for sequential transactions called paywords. The idea here is that chained hashes linked prepaying coins of escalating value. A typical transaction set would work like this. As the payer consumes more content, the payee demands multiple sequential payments. At the end of the transaction series, Say, at the end of a podcast, only the final pay word is validated with the bank. This allows for the efficient combination of multiple microtransactions and decreases the bandwidth needed to validate the transaction. As an aside, I don't see why something like this couldn't be implemented over the blockchain. Let's switch gears and talk about token-based digital currencies, of which DigiCash is the quintessential example. DigiCash worked like this. You give the bank money, and they give you a digital token. You give a copy of the token to your payee, who then asks the bank to validate the token and credit their account. Here's a cartoon that I believe is from DigiCash's website that explains half the story. It starts with Alice sending a copy of her coins to Cindy, who then exchanges them at her bank. How could that possibly be complicated? It was a pretty simple concept, but as with most things in real life, the devil is in the details. While public key cryptography secured the coins, this did nothing to keep the bank from knowing to whom the coins were issued. This is where the genius of DigiCash founder David Chaum comes into play. Chaum came up with a brilliant blind signature scheme to make DigiCash coins, well, more like real coins, or real cash. Here's our hypothetical DigiCash banknote. A real physical bill, like we saw before, has a value, security features, and a serial number, just like this one. You'll notice, however, our DigiCash bill is something of a cross between a check and a Federal Reserve note. The DigiCash note is of no value absent a signature from the bank. If we were to try to implement DigiCash on paper, you can imagine taking this to the teller at the bank, handing over a $100 bill, and asking the bank to sign it. The bank takes note of the serial number, signs the bill, and promises to give $100 to whoever presents it first for payment. The bank uses the serial number to make sure no one tries to redeem the note twice. So what's the problem? Well, in this model, the bank knows which bill belongs to which customer. That's information that's not needed by the bank to be a bank, so why should they have it? How can you keep the bank from knowing what it is signing, but still allowing it to only sign with a particular value? Anyone remember carbon paper? Picture this. You stuff the worthless, unsigned DigiCash note into an envelope, put some carbon copy paper over it, seal the envelope, and head to the bank. You give the bank your $100 bill, get a stamp and signature, and Bob's your uncle, simple as that. Okay, cute, but how did it really work? This slide is a bit complicated, but it does explain itself. I'll walk you through it. Alice thinks up a secret random number R. She encrypts it with the bank's public key. She then multiplies it by the banknote token T. She sends the product to the bank, who sees only gibberish, but they sign it with a private key. The act of signing imparts value to the now encrypted token T, but it also decrypts R. She then divides by R and is left with a valid token that the bank has never seen. Now I'd say that's pretty clever. DigiCash did get their technology to market. Their first customer was a Missouri bank with about $2 billion in assets. How did they do this? Well, first, they used the existing financial system to their advantage and didn't try to recreate the wheel. They certainly did not flaunt the anti-money laundering laws or the know your customer requirements. They met surprisingly little resistance to getting to market. It was a truly revolutionary idea and worth a fortune. And Chaum knew that. The problem is that those with the fortunes didn't know that. DigiCash went bankrupt shortly after debuting with Twain Bank and filed for bankruptcy in 1997. The technology still lingers on, but should be, for the most part, off patent. This could prove to be a serious contender yet. Why were there so many attempts at digital currencies before? Well, most initial attempts focused solely on transactions, and smaller microtransactions at that. The general thought at the time seemed to be that digital currencies would be needed to buy digital goods. In fact, many of these currencies had goods delivery verification built in. I think we can trace the growth of the ad-supported internet and the failure of newspapers to adapt to the internet era directly to the lack of an appropriate micropayment transfer scheme. When these currency systems were designed, not much thought was given to the nature of money itself. People weren't thinking of digital currency as a store of value, but rather as a disposable and temporary representation of dollars or other fiat currency. What do these attempts teach us? Well, making a digital currency is difficult. You need a system that's easy to use and not costly. It must be secure, scalable, and easy to validate. Others either failed for technical reasons or for legal violations. At the close of the millennium, we still had no digital currency suitable for private or small transactions. Only the credit card payment processors survived, leaving a significant fraction of the population effectively unbanked, a condition that still exists today. In part 2 of this lecture, I'll be taking each of the technological pillars of Bitcoin, if you will, and tracing back the evolution of each of these ideas. We'll cover public key cryptography and the decades-long struggle to bring this technology to the public, Merkle trees, digital timestamping, and the public double spending database, and the proof-of-work algorithm that should have, and still could, save us from spam. We'll see how Bitcoin evolved from a clever combination of these ideas with relatively little modification to create something truly unique and extremely useful. See you then!